herding cats.
I know. Commissioners, if we could find our seats, we'd like to get the meeting started.
Hey.
We have a quorum?
We do.
How you doing? I am doing great. What about you?
You looking good.
Thank you. I feel great. Yeah, riding my bicycle.
This February 16th, the CRTPA board meeting. Mr. Slay, we'll start with a roll call.
Yes, sir. You're on.
Commissioner Barfield,
I'm right here.
Mayor Allen,
Present.
Commissioner Merritt,
Present.
Commissioner Via
Present.
Commissioner Dozier,
Here.
Commissioner Maddox, Commissioner Minor,
Present.
Commissioner Matlow,
Here.
Commissioner Richardson,
Hello.
Commissioner Williams Cox.
She's on her way.
Okay. Do we have any agenda modifications today?
No, sir, at this point, we do not.
Do we have citizens' comments or citizens to be heard?
No, sir, we did not receive any via email or any request to speak.
Okay, thank
I
you.
believe I'm-
Moving on to the consent agenda. Do we have,
Consent.
Second.
we have a motion by Commissioner Merritt and seconded by Commissioner Barfield to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Carries unanimously. Moving on to section 6, roll call vote, agenda items. Number A, letter A, the Transportation Improvement Program amendments. Mr. Slay?
We have two amendments to our CIP. Ms. Lex is going to present those, and as the item said, remember, this is a roll call vote. And I say that so I don't forget to remind you that it's a roll call vote.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion on the table by Commissioner Merritt, seconded by Commissioner Barfield. Any discussion on this item? This will be a roll call vote. Mr. Slay?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Barfield,
Aye.
Mayor Allen,
Aye.
Commissioner Merritt,
Aye.
Commissioner Via
Aye.
Commissioner Dozier,
Aye.
Commissioner Maddox,
Mr. Chair, what's the item?
We are on the Transportation Improvement Program amendment.
That
6A.
recommendation? That recommendation?
Approval.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Minor,
Aye.
Commissioner Matlow,
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams Cox.
Sounds like ayes have it.
Thank
Well,
you.
well,
Unanimously passed.
Smart. 6A.
Thank you. Moving on to 7, CRTPA action, starting with A, the fiscal year 2022 to 26 draft tentative work program.
Yes,
Is that an action item or just a presentation?
This is a presentation, Mr. Merritt. I'd like to turn or leave the floor with Suzanne Lex. She's going to give you all a presentation on the draft tentative work program.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to present the draft tentative work program. I want to start out with the total amount that's programmed for the next 5 years for the region, which is $232,162,000 for all 4 counties. The draft work program identifies primarily state and federal funding for transportation projects. considers the funding that the CRTPA project priority list approved by the board in June and September of last year. It outlines the multimodal transportation projects for the next 5 years. And for the purpose of this presentation, I am just giving an overview of the roadway projects, bicycle and pedestrian projects. I have not included any transit or airport improvements that may have been funded in the work program. And it includes the new projects introduced in the 5th year, which is fiscal year 26, and it reflects the projects that will be approved by the CRTPA board in the next TIP cycle. Moving on, oops, thank you, Greg. I'll let Greg, there we go. Moving on to Gadsden County. I'm just highlighting some of the projects within each of the counties. There are 5 new resurfacing projects in Gadsden County that total almost $10 million. Other resurfacing projects, which means there was already money in them in the work program for design and or right-of-way. That's $28 million. There's 1 new bridge project, construct a bridge, Salem Road over Swamp Creek. That's $4.2 million. And then 3 sidewalk projects. One of them is a transportation alternative project priority number 1. The board approved it last year, which is the Jefferson Street US 90 Quincy sidewalks. And I'd like to note that FDOT worked with us to get the design for this project funded in current year, and then construction is funded in the next 2 years. And then Havana Middle Street, Safe Routes to School project, and Atlanta Street sidewalk projects. The total for Gadsden County is $44,328,000. For Jefferson County, there are 3 new resurfacing projects, a little over $9 million. Other resurfacing, I get $28,827,000. There are 2 bridge projects, County Road 257 over Osceola River and County Road 259 over the railroad bridge. $7.4 million. Monticello Trail Extension design, that's going to be starting next year, and that's $760,000. And there's a safety project for $2.1 million. The work program reflects the priority number 1 for bicycle and pedestrian, the Monticello Trail Extension. So again, as I mentioned, they consider our priorities in the programming of these projects.
We could pause for a second. Commissioner
Yes.
VBCA, is your question related to the item?
It's related to the Gaston County projects. I have these questions I was going to ask FDOT at the end of the meeting, but since 2 of my questions have been actually mentioned in this presentation, I think I need to ask those questions for clarification.
Okay.
They're very relevant. One of the questions is the one relating to the Ottapogos Highway from East King down to the Georgia state line. The amount here is $3.5 million. When we applied for this money and approved for the resurfacing of Ottapogos Highway, we also later requested additional funding for the widening with shoulders on this road, in addition to the $3.6 million that was initially approved for this road. So the 2 questions I have here for this is, what is the status on the request for additional funding for the widening, shoulder widening of that road? And 2, when is this project actually scheduled to start? Because the starting date have been asked questions by citizens, so I need to know that, on that. And then the other one is the Swamp Creek Road on 159, the bridge. I need to also know the timeline on that, when it will actually get started, so I can convey that to the citizens that are asking me with regards to that, since we just completed the one next to it has just been completed, so they are now asking us to when the Swamp Creek Road, the Swamp Creek Bridge will be started. I have other questions for FDOT later on other items.
As it relates to the County Road 65 Autonomous Highway Resurfacing Project, the department was made aware of the county's interest in adding paved shoulders to that. To that end, the secretary requested the county submit a letter to the department outlining the change in the scope that would be related to the shoulder widening. As of yesterday, February 15th, we have yet to receive that request from Gadsden County. And as it relates to the start date of this project, it will be a local agency type agreement. So it would really be up to the county as to when they would like to start the project once we get into the fiscal year the funds were available. As to the bridge project you mentioned, I'm not aware of that project. I don't have those project details in front of me, but I can get you that information and email that through CRTPA staff to you.
It says construction in 2022 on the 5-year.
No, I think it's construction in 2021 I mean, I don't know, I'm hearing 2021, I'm hearing 2022. The Jefferson Commissioner just said 2022, so that is where the confusion really lies. That is why I want to know concretely from FDOT as to when that bridge replacement will actually begin.
Mr. Slay, can we get some, come back and get clarity on that at a future
Yeah,
time?
and
Okay.
Commissioner Vibisi, looking at it right now, the construction is scheduled on you said the Salem Road Bridge, correct?
The Swamp Creek
Oh,
Bridge.
sorry.
Yes, Salem Road.
The 59, we just completed the Outer Pogos Creek Bridge.
Yeah, let us get back with you and get some clarification on that. I'm trying to find it here on the work program, but I'm not seeing it.
2022. It's in the highway, off-state highway.
Right.
Yeah, 159, I mean, no, it's 159, County Road 159, that's what it's on.
Okay. I'm making a note of it, and we'll make sure we get those answers for you when we come back.
Okay?
Okay.
Back to the presentation.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No? All right. Moving on to Jefferson County.
You already did Jefferson.
I know, I'm sorry. I thought I turned my page correctly to me. Leon County. In Leon County, the total that is programmed in Leon County is $108,085,000. The roadway capacity project, of course, is the biggest project here, and I've just highlighted the construction cost of that, which is $57,952,000. The total at the top, the 62+ million, that includes additional phases for the capital circle, such as utilities and environmental, as well as the design phase for capacity on Orange Avenue. Note that the work program as proposed has deferred Capitol Circle Southwest from Crawfordville Highway to Spring Hill Road. Originally, it was in fiscal year '25. It is not in the current work program, so it would be moved out at this time, and it may come back into the work program in the future, depending on availability of funds. The FDOT is aware that it is one of our top priorities. The board approved the use of our SU funds for project priority number 1, which is an improvement to the intelligent transportation system for camera upgrades and some construction installation in phase 1. That is programmed at $750,000. There's 3 new resurfacing projects. Actually, it's 4 resurfacing projects there, 5. We've got 2 on Capitol Circle, forgive me. And then Mahan Drive and Tennessee Street. So that's a total of $27.8 million. We will be working with the department. One of the Tennessee Street is down from Acala Road in that area. We'll be working to see if there's any other safety improvements that can be incorporated with that resurfacing. For other resurfacing projects, it's $9.6 million. FDOT has funded our freight priority, the interchange improvement at I-10 and US 319 Thomasville Road. I want to note that I looked at last year's work program, and it had included this project, but apparently it did not make it into the final work program. So my summary says it's deferred, and that is incorrect. It is actually newly programmed this year. We have a Safe Routes to School project at 510, an intersection safety improvement on Tennessee Street. The design phase is 192,000, and then almost 1.8 million for a new bridge, Miccosukee Road over an unnamed branch. The total, as I mentioned before, over $108 million. Moving on to,
Pause for a second. I recognize Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Suzanne, just quick question on the I-10 Thomasville Road interchange.
yes,
This came up many years ago. There was a lot of concepts, additional flyovers, things like that, and we actually expanded the scope of the study to include a potential Walani Boulevard interchange. So I'm guessing that this particular project is not a duplicate of what we saw in the past. Is that right?
that is correct.
Okay.
These are some extensions of the lanes,
Okay.
some additional capacity there in the turning lanes. So there will be some reconfiguration to the existing interchange, but it will not be to the extent that they had proposed originally in the PD&A.
And can I read into, thank you for that, and can I read into that some of the issues associated that, I shouldn't say that way, some of the challenges that we projected for that interchange that led to those really substantial improvements, those projects that were proposed years ago, has that been mitigated by a potential Walani, or we don't know yet?
Greg?
No, ma'am, Commissioner Dozier, this was actually just focused on the eastbound off-ramp, basically adding, I believe it's a through lane over to Raymond Deal. So in essence, kind of an addition and a reconfiguration of the lanes that are already there. Nowhere near the scope, I believe, that what you're referring to from a few years ago. Those challenges still remain, but this is a short-term issue with traffic backing up onto what's referred to the main line, which is I-10. This was strictly put in place to deal with that particular issue.
Okay, that's where I was going. So this is a short term addressing one part of this puzzle, and we may still need to look at Thomasville Road interchange at some point, but for now we're focused on Walani. That's the interchange that's listed, and we could come back to this if needed in the future. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Any other questions?
Back to the presentation.
All right. Thank you.
Good report.
Thank you
We
very
didn't
much.
get nothing in Wakulla?
Oh,
I'm just kidding.
Wakulla doesn't exist.
Randy, how could I forget you? I just would never do that. I'm so sorry.
Randy likes a short presentation. He won't mind.
He's so excited about
like
that
the
4-lane.
I heard good presentation and I'm thinking I'm done. All
You
right.
don't need to
so-
present Wakulla. I do have a question though, Suzanne.
Okay.
You got $700-something thousand for landscaping on 319 from Bloxham North. What is that going to consist of?
The money for the landscaping, I didn't think it was that much.
It says 871,000.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
It's not.
Wakulla County. In the work program?
Yeah, it's listed there in the citizens report. That does seem like a lot for landscaping. Let us go
Lot of
back.
trees. We
Let
love
us go
trees.
back and check that. I mean, typically, DOT, they will set aside a percentage of the construction cost. Usually it's about 1%. Brian, is that still? 1.5%. So, yeah, that would make that an $80 million project, which I don't think it is. But, yeah,
Now,
let us
wait.
go back and look at that, have that checked.
Later on in the presentation, it lists preliminary engineering at $33,000 for landscaping. So I don't know which
Yeah, there may be, we may have some information backwards in there.
And I will say that from the work program we received, there had been some changes made, and if I did not pick up on that from the first to the previous, because what I saw program was the 33,000 for design. So we'll get you the details on that exactly. All right?
Board meeting tonight, but I won't say.
Okay. But 39.4 million for Wakulla County, I think, again, two, with a bridge replacement as well, capacity, 3 trail projects, and 5 new resurfacing, so.
Any other questions or concerns on this item?
I do have a date for the bridge project in Gaston County.
Yes, sir.
It is scheduled for a September 2021 letting. So construction should begin around December of 2021 or January of 2022.
Could you repeat it again if you don't mind, sir?
The letting is September of 2021,
Okay.
and construction should begin in December.
Thank you for that
Thank you very
information.
much.
Moving on to B, 2021 safety targets, Mr. Slay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Burke will give you all a presentation and update on our annual safety measures.
Good afternoon, members. 'Tis the season to discuss transportation performance measures as well as safety. Ooh. And you know what? Okay, I'm going to look this way because I can't read that over there. As a background, transportation performance management actually is a link relating to system information with regards to investment policy and decision to achieve outcomes related to national performance goals. There is federal regulations that require that MPOs such as the CRTPA address performance management in 7 areas, one of which is safety, which is what we're here to discuss today. Now, since 2018, we have been doing this, as our executive director said, annually. And what we are doing is actually adopting targets for 5 specific performance measures. And those measures are number of fatalities, number of serious injuries, number of non-motorized fatalities and non-motorized serious injuries, as well as the rate of fatalities and the rate of serious injuries. Now, with regards to the CRT addressing these safety targets, we have 2 options, as you may recall. We can support the FDOT targets, and annually since 2018, the FDOT has actually adopted a target of 0 for all 5 performance measures, or the CRTPA may adopt our own safety performance measures. And what we have done actually is done that. We have used FDOT data, and you can see at the bottom of there, it's really hard to read, but for the 5 safety performance measures, you can see there, those are highlighted in yellow. For each MPO within the state of Florida, that data is provided. Now, this is a little bit of a close-up for one of the safety performance measures, the most recent information that the CRTPA got. And what you can see is that information is for 2015 to 2019. Now, again, this data is provided by FDOT. Some of you may recall in May of 2020, this agency actually adopted an agreement between FDOT and the CRTPA. It's called the Transportation Performance Measures Consensus Document that relates to their provision of this information to not only the CRTPA, but to all MPOs within the state of Florida. And with regards to what we are proposing today, this is how we got that information. Now, where are we with regards to what we have adopted since 2018 until currently? As you can see in the blue columns, in the green columns there to the left, we have the adopted target for 2018, and then that one green column to the right of that is what was actually reported. And for 4 of the 5 adopted targets, we actually met those. However, for one of those, in the darkest green, number of fatalities for 2018, we did not meet that. Similar situation for 2019, the next one in light blue. And that, what we did not meet for that year was actually the number of non-motorized fatalities as well as non-motorized serious injuries. Now, last year, we obviously adopted 2020, and this year we will be adopting at this meeting 2021. The information for 2020 we will get next year, so we can actually see if we achieved those targets that we adopted last year. Now, digging a little bit more deeply with information, from 2020 to 2019, in terms of serious injuries and serious fatalities, serious injuries up there are actually in green. And you can see since 2010, they have actually gone down and remained relatively consistent. In terms of fatalities, those have stayed generally in the same direction with actually a slight decrease since 2016. Now, before we actually move on to the discussion for this item and what we're proposing to do today and what we need to do today, I want to talk about what do we actually do with this data? Why are we doing this? As I said earlier, one purpose of transportation performance measures or management, is actually to help you all, key decision makers, to actually link and understand the consequences of decisions that you all are making with regards to what projects we fund, what our priorities are, issues like that. So as detailed in the agenda item, I'm going to go over a few of those things. I'm not going to go over all of them, but essentially, what is the CRTPA doing to address safety beyond, again, adopting this annually? Some of you may remember in November 2017, the agency actually adopted a funding guidance policy for CRTPA urban attributable, or SU funds, and those are federal funds that the CRTPA receives every year that have provided this agency a lot of discretion in their use. One of the uses that we've used consistent with that policy adoption is actually to put them on safety projects. The CRTPA has the Transportation Alternatives Program, and that's something that some of you recall. We solicit new applications actually every 2 years. And historically, all those projects that we have awarded have been safety projects for both pedestrians and bicyclists. Something that's pretty good with regards to coordination. Bi-monthly, the CRTPA meets with District 3 Safety Office, and we discuss safety issues within the 4-county area. And that is something we do with some of our transportation partners, local governments, and we actually highlight some of our concerns. We highlight some of the concerns that you all have brought forth in meetings like in the board meetings, as well as we identify potential projects for which we would like to pursue safety projects. Resurfacings, as you noted probably from Suzanne's presentation just before on the work program, a key focus of the FDOT work program is system preservation. What does that mean? Often resurfacing existing roadways. What we do is when we see resurfacing projects that are actually funded in the work program, we do a safety review with both the district as well as our local partners, such as planning departments, Blueprint, and we see what safety improvements can we kind of add to those resurfacing projects. An example real quickly of that, about 4 or 3 years ago when we resurfaced North Monroe, we identified that there were some missing crosswalks on certain key locations within Midtown. We had that rolled into that project, and we were very grateful for the district to actually be amenable to working with us for doing that. Typically, also, some of the things we identify are missing sidewalk links in that, in those resurfacings that we could potentially address. And another thing is, in 2018, we adopted the congestion management plan. And besides looking at congestion, as its name says, a key focus of that is actually safety. One of the things that it looks at is identifying high crash locations. We are currently in the process of updating that plan this year, and you'll be seeing that, and we're gonna update the data and actually focus more so like the document does on safety issues. And then finally, I wanna say that the CRTP website, we've added a focus on the issue of transportation performance management in detail on the homepage. And so folks, citizens can go read about what we've adopted, what we've done. And last slide, and then we can open this up.
Pause. We'll pause for a moment.
Sure.
Thank you.
Commissioner Barfield.
Yes, going back to the slide before that, on your resurfacing, no, next one. On your resurfacing projects, as the norm, you're reaching out to the smaller counties, even though they don't have a blueprint partner and other partners like that. I know that Mr. Slay and you and everybody have been reaching out to us, but I want to make sure we're doing that throughout our whole region and making sure that that is a normal act that y'all do.
Yes, to confirm that is something we do. And an example, as you may recall, resurfacing a number of years ago, that was directly involved, actually you assisted in, was when we widened US 90 and added shoulders as it went through eastern Leon County into Jefferson County.
Yeah.
That's a safety, that's an addition of safety amenity associated with the resurfacing.
And Commissioner Minor, did you want to speak now or at the conclusion of the presentation?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I can wait till after the presentation.
Okay, and again, so today we're looking to adopt the safety targets for 2021. As I told you, how those were adopted. One thing we do want to bring attention to you, as is in the agenda item, when we held literally 2 weeks to the day, we held committee meetings. One of the committees, CMAC, Citizens Multimodal Advisory Committee, actually voted to recommend that you all reduce the recommended targets that you see up there by 10%.
Motion to adopt the CRTPA staff recommended safety targets for 2021.
Second.
Yeah, we have a motion on the floor to adopt staff recommendation by Commissioner Merritt, seconded by Commissioner Barfield. Is the presentation concluded?
It is.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Commissioner Minor for comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we had a similar discussion about this last year, which was, I think, the first time that Mr. Matlow, Mr. Chair, and I were on the CRTPA, I believe. And I had a discussion about this with Greg. You know, the FDOT has this Vision Zero initiative, which basically says for their safety measurements, they're zero, with the idea that, you know, no fatalities acceptable, no serious injuries acceptable on our roads. And I see the value in that. But Greg and I have talked about it, and I think there might be a general consensus amongst this CRTPA that having some performance goals gives us more accountability, more ability to plan and try to reduce those numbers. Is that correct, Greg? Yeah. But again, Greg and I were talking about it yesterday, and what we're being asked to do this year is apply that 5-year rolling average to our metrics, as we do since 2018. For this year, though, because the last year has rolled off, we actually have some increased target measurement goals from last year. Number of fatalities, rate of fatalities, and number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Each of those performance metrics is actually increasing. In other words, we are basically voting to allow ourselves an increased number of fatalities and serious injuries, which I know is not the point of this, but it just seems uncomfortable for me to do that. So one thing I wanted to propose, perhaps a friendly amendment, Commissioner, is to use the 2020 metrics where are they are lower. Number of fatalities, number of serious injuries, number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. But then keep the metrics that show a decrease from 2020, number of serious injuries and rate of serious injuries. So that way we're applying the performance goals from last year where they're lower, and then applying the ones from this year using the 5 rolling average when they are lower. I'd like to propose that. Commissioner, would you consider accepting that as a friendly amendment?
Commissioner Merritt?
Greg?
That's completely up to the board. The one thing I wanted to point out, you know, on the CMAC recommendation, and we had a lot of discussion with the CMAC, a lot of good discussion, focusing more on the bike and ped aspects of it. That's one of the things that when we get the data from DOT, bike and ped fatalities and serious injuries are all lumped into one number. So we've actually started some work trying to go back and exact some of that out and get more detailed information. But what I was concerned with on the 10% reduction is that's, in essence, it's kind of an arbitrary number. I agree with the premise, but one of the requirements that we have on the Fed side is we have to back it up with data. So I'm much more comfortable with Commissioner Minor's recommendation. At least there is some data to back that up and not just that arbitrary 10%. But just want to let you know, we are looking at different ways to approach this next year. We actually have our certification meeting with Federal Highway next week, and this is one of the things we plan on bringing up with them, is how we can better address the performance measures.
I'll modify my motion to reflect Commissioner's suggestion, if y'all understand what he said.
Yeah, Mr. Chair?
I'll modify
Commissioner-
my second. But I do have a question about that, if you don't mind, real quick. So if we don't meet our performance, measures, are we penalized in any way?
No, ma'am, and that's one of the things that was just interesting when this first came out, is Federal Highway was very clear, said there is no punitive measures if you don't meet, your actual performance measures. While we were glad to hear that, at the same time, I'm kind of concerned this has just turned into an annual exercise that we go through, hey, look what we did, let's move on. So we're gonna try to endeavor to approach this a little bit differently over the next year and see if we can't, get some better use out of the data. As Greg pointed out, we've got several things that we're doing to improve safety overall, but one of the things, especially, dealing with crash data for a long time, when you look at fatalities, they tend to be random. You can't go usually to a single source for a fatality and go, what happened here, in something that we could physically change. 99% of the time, it's human error. So we're always dealing with that, but at least we've got some procedures in place, working with DOT and other agencies, that we can address the safety concerns that we have as part of a lot of these projects that we have.
We'll go to Commissioner Richardson and Commissioner
Wait,
Joseph.
Mr. Chair, just let me wrap up, if you don't mind, Lee, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. And the reason why I'm proposing this is because, performance measurement is supposed to guide us toward continuous improvement. And by doing this sets us on the path to doing that. And just to summarize, if I can say it real quickly, it's basically taking the proposed target of this year, comparing that with the adopted target of last year, and then taking the metrics that are lower for each metric. And also I'd like the record to reflect, I think all of us agree that no fatality, no serious illness or injury is acceptable, but this is a way to help us guide us toward continuous improvement down to zero. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Agreed.
Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question, how did the CPAC, Greg, come up with the 10% reduction? Did they just kind of pull that out of?
Yes, sir. I think that was just something they
Thin air.
wanted to make a statement that similar to what I think Commissioner Minor is saying, that we need to be going in the other direction and not up.
Right.
But again, they landed on 10%. And I told them at the time I had some concerns, again, the way we're required to do this, that we can't necessarily just, again, arbitrarily say we're going to reduce the target by 10%. At least, I think with Commissioner Minor's suggestion, we have some data that we can tie that back to.
Okay. And I guess the other question that I have is, in your conversation, Greg, you said, these are things that we really have no control over.
Correct.
And so why are we, I don't want to use the phrase fooling ourselves, but why are we fooling ourselves that we can have an impact on fatalities when, resurfacing is not going to stop fatalities from happening.
Right.
Crosswalks is not going to stop fatalities from happening. So I'm not quite sure where we're going with these metrics.
Honestly, I think it's one of those things, and this was mandated down from Federal Highway.
Okay.
It's one of those things that sounds good on paper, but when you get an actual practice, you kind of question the usefulness of it. Though the one thing I will say is it makes us focus on safety more so maybe than we used to when doing some of these different things that we're doing. And I don't know that I would ever focus on the fatalities, because one of the things, when you look at the chart up here, that bottom blue line, you see we had a spike in 2016. When you drop 2015 out of that, that's where your target goes up based on the methodology that we're using. But I've looked back over the last 10 years, and I believe, around 13 or 14, we had somewhere around 38 fatalities. One year it went from 38 or 40 to 72, went back down to the mid-40s. So the nature of the fatalities are just so random. But I do think there's things that we can look at more so on the crash rates, at least, and digging deeper into the bike and ped side of it, look at some of the causations of those. A lot of times, it comes back to education and unfortunately enforcement. And by and large, I think, traffic law enforcement is usually low on law enforcement's agenda because they got some other things they have to worry about.
But I think at least it does bring the conversation up, just like the one we're having right now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Dozier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the same line of questions, I mean, we want to do everything we can. Commissioner Minor, I think your comments kind of lean in that direction to eliminate as many accidents, injuries, fatalities as we can. But you're right, Commissioner Richardson, we can't control everything. So it's hard to be judged on that, on those metrics. I do think it's a good way to highlight what's happening in our community if there is something we can do. And Greg, you just got right to where my question was in response to Commissioner Richardson. I think a lot of this has to do with education. We talk about that with bike ped often, particularly in the downtown area. There's been a lot of investment, particularly from the city, in bike and pedestrian safety downtown. So I'm wondering if, and this may be a bit of a stretch, but is there any kind of demographic data or time of year that might help us analyze this, or seasonal or something like that? Are most of the accidents happening with young people? Are most of them happening when it rains? You know, things like that. That may lead us to focus on education, even if they're not at locations that we could really do something about. And last part of that is there any funding for PSAs or types of education that can help, raise awareness, particularly on bike ped? Is that ever something we've explored, and do you think the demographic data would help us get a little more nuanced picture on this?
I think we definitely could, and that's part of what we're talking about doing. I will tell you, it's always been interesting. Generally, when you look at trends for crashes, they occur in daylight and in dry weather.
Yeah.
Because that's the time most folks are generally not paying that much attention. If it's raining, you tend to kind of slow down, pay attention more. But that's what we're going to look at in terms of what we're doing now, is trying to do a deeper dive into all this data to try to extract some of that demographic data, things like that. There are always programs out there you can find for PSAs, but I think we need to dig deeper than what we do now with just this general, we had this many millions of miles of travel, this many crashes, there's your rate, and we move on.
So and I'm glad you're looking at a new way to present this and for us to work with it for next year. So as we do that, could we tee up for next year a conversation about the public education piece? Sure. If we do have a different way to assess this, we might be able to go after some of those dollars. Would that be, just yes, not to get ahead of you, but
no, I think that's the path we're heading.
Okay. The second question, Mr. Chair, is perhaps slightly unrelated on the safety measures, but I think there is a safety component. Over the years, I've talked to several people who, not necessarily are wheelchair bound, some of them are, but have other medical conditions that may make it difficult to navigate our sidewalks sometimes. So they will raise issues, certain areas. I think some folks have come to the city about downtown. I've heard it in different areas, just where we have sidewalks that tree roots may have separated or something. There's one young woman in particular who I've talked with over the years. She never wanted to raise this as a personal issue. She wanted to advocate for others, but she has MS and difficult, to move her legs sometimes, and she tripped downtown. This was years ago, but that just kind of stands out as another safety issue, and it certainly could come into play at an intersection. We talked about this several years ago. There was an intersection on Pensacola that someone reached out to us about a wheelchair not being able to navigate the ramp right at the light. I think that was White Drive and Pensacola. So do we ever look at ADA accessibility, particularly at those intersection ramps, as part of the safety analysis?
I know with DOT, anytime they do a resurfacing project, that's one of the first things they do is they do an ADA assessment of the roadway, and I'm pretty sure most of the local jurisdictions do that as well. I don't know but I know DOT for a fact does that.
Okay. Well, I would be really interested to make sure that it's something that both Leon and Tallahassee do, and I'm sure it could come into play in some areas of our other counties, just to make sure those ramps at the intersections are still working after we do resurfacing or some other kind of project. Thanks.
Thank
Thank you. Can we pull the slide back up with the proposed targets, just so we can be clear on the numbers Commissioner Minor's referring to? And just have on the screen, and then we'll go to Commissioner via BCA.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's attachment 2. It's probably the best page to look at.
That one, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some requests I've been making with regards to safety. It has nothing to do directly with the presentation, but I am very glad that Commissioner Minor made the comment that he made as to, with regards to any accident or any wreck is not needed. No injury should be acceptable. There are two things I've been requesting. I hope with this modification, we seriously consider these as a very serious safety measures that we need to implement in Gaston County. A traffic light at the intersection of State Road 12 and Point Milligan Road. That is a fork where you have Point Milligan coming in, and then 12 coming from Havana going to Quincy. Folks just jet through. I have worked with the county. They have a caution flashing light on it. Nobody pays attention to that. And we're about to resurface Point Milligan, which means the speed rate coming from Point Milligan into 12 is going to be increased. So we need to actually not rely on the metrics with regards to fatalities and crash data to determine they say sometimes prevention is better than cure. So, yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, you said State Road 12, I didn't catch the cross.
State Road 12 and Point Milligan Road intersection. Right there in front of that convenience store, the gas station. And then the other thing, the other project I've been asking for, and I hope we're able to consider that now, is a crosswalk on Pat Thomas Highway. Crosswalk coming from Captain D's towards crossing Pat Thomas to Walgreen, and a crosswalk crossing from the National Guard Armory to Walmart. There are a lot of folks, pedestrians, who come on that road going to Walmart, and when they get to that, to cross the road, Pat Thomas, there are a lot of near calls. So if we can have a crosswalk there with maybe the kind of flashing light one that we have on Gaines and somewhere here in Tallahassee there, I think that will be something that will improve the safety of the citizens crossing those roads. Thank you, Commissioner Minor, for at least raising that enabled me to actually tie this into that argument. So I hope we work on making those two projects priorities in our next funding cycle. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know those areas very well that you're referring to, and you're right. It is you're taking your life in your own hands. 100 years ago, I worked in the FDOT safety office, where these reports were brought in to collect this data. College students actually helped to collect this data for us, and you would think that having worked with this data will help them understand too how careful they needed to be. It may not have been. That's been a long time. So just to point out that that's where this information is coming from. They're actually coming from crash reports that are being scanned in the system, or being GIS into a system to collect this data. I also wanted to mention that I received an email, and I'm sure you all received an email as well, from a citizen, Hans Von Tool. Did you all receive an email from this individual?
Hans Von Toll?
Uh-huh.
I did not.
I did not.
I received that email.
Okay. Well, Mr. Von Toll asked me, and I'm going to just bring it here and put it on the record, that at a meeting 2 weeks ago, the CMAC voted to lower the targets of the safety performance measures by 10% from the staff suggested values. And the suggested values were based upon historical averages. In this case, the 2015 through 2019 numbers. It says, this seems to me and the CMAC to indicate that the CRTPA is not interested in making our roads safer, and that they are fine with keeping things as they are with the many fatalities and serious injuries on our roads. It is unclear how these safety performance measure targets can lead to the FDOT goal of 0 fatalities. I would like to ask you to follow the lead of the CMAQ and lower the suggested targets to at least indicate that we want traffic to become safer. So I'm just sharing this information. I guess, Greg, I need some clarification on what he's saying here and what we're saying here, and how does it all come out in the to be where we want it to be. And the other thing is, why would we set targets with no penalty? So what would cause, what would we do with it? Are we just checking the box, saying we did it? Or why, what?
Well, and that's what we were talking about earlier. You know, when these were originally put out by Federal Highway in 2017, there were no penalties for not meeting the targets. And I made the comment earlier, it has kind of turned into a checkbox. And the 10% that Mr. Von Toll in the email apparently sent to you, that's the 10% I was referring to earlier, that the CMAQ recommended that we do that. But as I told them, and then when we followed back up, we have a methodology that we have to have it based on some type of data, and just an arbitrary 10% reduction, I don't think passes that, backing that up with data. I was more comfortable with Commissioner Minor's suggestion that we at least roll it back to last year's numbers, which were lower. And again, they're based on that, the rolling average that you can see in the chart, where we had that sharp increase in fatalities, especially in 2016. That's what pushed our average up, and technically that's what pushes our target up. But then again, I'm comfortable with using the 2020 numbers because those are lower, and there is some level of data to back those up. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I don't know if it answered it either, but hopefully Mr. Von Toll is watching and know that his question did get asked in this room.
And Hans is on our CMAQ committee, and
Okay.
Mary Kay, she's here, she's our chairman. So we
Okay.
had that very conversation at the CMAQ meeting a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, all right.
Quick question, Mr. Chair, real quick before we get out of this.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Mr. Slay, is there, or FDOT, is there no other way we can collect data at least to get an idea of the degree of danger in these locations for us to use those metrics to determine the need, the prioritization of this request, as opposed to having some fatality or some crash data and so on and so forth, like speed and I don't know, any user engineers. Maybe there are some other way we can collect data to make this, allow some of this project meet the required threshold.
And Dr. B, I don't think it's a data collection problem, as Commissioner William Cox talked about. You know, apparently she was in the safety office, so she's seen the process. It's more so how we're required to use the data and using these averages, you know, that are, in our case, they're 4 county-wide, as opposed to identifying specific projects down to, similar to what you mentioned, you know, a potential project there. So that's what we want to work on over the next year or so. See if we can dig into that data a little bit deeper and define some trends that better show what's going on in our 4-county region, as opposed to just an aggregate of all the crashes that have happened in our 4-county region over a 5-year period.
Yeah. And I'm just going to weigh in here. I think we all want to see the numbers trending downward, obviously. Any decisions we make year by year, we don't have that much control over it. And I appreciate Commissioner Minor's comments, because I don't want to be going backwards, but we know the more we stay focused on safety year after year after year, what that goal could be in 5 years or 10 years really does come up to the decisions we make this year, next year. To Commissioner V's point, I think there's safety concerns in all of our counties that we'd like to see addressed, and I think that's something that would be appropriate to bring before these board, and as board members continue to press those for the safety of our communities. I asked for the slide to be pulled back up just so Commissioner Minor clarify. You want to go to the adopted 2020 targets, except for the ones that are lower in 2021? Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, thank you. So I'd like to apply the 2020 adopted targets for number of fatalities, rate of fatalities, and number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, because those are lower last year. And then the ones for the proposed projected targets for 2021 are the other two. Number of serious injuries and rate of injuries. So those would be, those numbers that are proposed on the rightmost column, we would then adopt. And then the other three that I mentioned would be adopted instead of the ones on the rightmost column.
So for clarification, we're not trending backwards. We're holding the line on some of those numbers and going down on the metrics where we think we can achieve them.
If you look at the two rightmost columns, we're taking the lowest number on each of those metrics.
Okay.
I want to remind people watching, we're not setting the number of fatalities that's going to happen. This is
Correct.
we're simply voting on a goal, folks. That's it. That's it. Hopefully, we exceed the goal. That's all we're doing.
Commissioner Dozier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did receive the same email from Hans, and Greg, I forwarded it to you, so you have it in your records now. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think the discussion before, Commissioner Minor, you're in the right posture with this, so I can support that motion. But one thing he did mention that I hadn't brought up, and you didn't mention it, was the different way we traveled in 2020 due to COVID. And I think that's going to be very interesting to see, I mean, across the board, all the different issues we face. Once we start having the data from 2020, we could see a lot of different trends, the times people travel, where they traveled, all different things like that. So I just, in going forward into this new process, I think we need to be cognizant that 2020 may look very different than previous years due to COVID and due to the months when we were shut down and people working from home or different things like that. So I thought that was a good point in the email, but thank you for bringing up the rest of it.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I want to make a comment on that. It's interesting you bring that up. Some of the, I guess I'll say anecdotal data that we've heard, we haven't really seen this in the crash reports yet, but it's apparent that the serious crashes actually saw an increase because of less traffic being on the road and people driving faster. So we, again, I've heard that in several different meetings. I've not seen the data to back that up, but yeah, 20 may be a year we have to kind of throw out in terms of looking at trends and things like that. But I wanted to make that point after you said that. We've heard that in several different instances where those particular types of crashes seem to be.
I think, thank you for bringing that up, Greg, because I think that is fascinating. And frankly, living in the downtown area, I heard a lot more very fast traffic when the roads were quiet. That was something that stood out last spring and summer. And when I say very fast traffic, just, you know, cars whizzing by all over, and it was unique, and it kind of died down once people started going out of their homes again. So it might be good for us to assess the 2020 data, but we need to know that it's going to be different. Thanks.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Commissioner Minor, final comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very quick. First of all, I just want to thank Commissioner Merritt for accepting the friendly amendment. I think this is probably the best approach for this year, and it's justifiable to the federal government, which is what we are mandated to do. And then next year, I'm very interested to see what the analysis will be at a lower level of detail, because then we'll be able to take a look at where we have some issues within the CRTPA region, and then we can justify what projects we might want to fund going forward to address those issues. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, let's vote. All those in favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Carries unanimously. Moving on to C, the Suncoast Parkway discussion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this was just kind of an update, and I believe some board members want to have some discussion. Greg's pulling it up. As we talked about at our November meeting, this was actually supposed to be a topic of discussion for our retreat last month, but wanted to give you a quick update on where we're on the Suncoast Corridor and the MCORS projects. Just to give you a little bit of background, if you recall, the MCORS was authorized in 2019 through the Senate Bill 7068. It included 3 corridors located throughout the state. The one, of course, we're focusing on is the Suncoast, which goes about 150 miles from Jefferson County down to Citrus County to tie into the existing portion of the Suncoast Parkway. The bill added or authorized 3 task force, 1 for each corridor, and in essence, those task force were charged with looking at the need as well as the potential impacts and how to mitigate those impacts through the corridors. Each of the task force submitted their reports in November of 2020, about a month or so, I believe, after they were scheduled. They got a little bit of extra time because of the COVID issues. And one of the things we've talked about, you know, these corridors are actually set forth in statute, and they have, as it says here, to the maximum extent feasible, construction shall begin by December 31st of 2020 and be open to traffic no later than December 31st of 2030. So that's kind of a big question everybody's asked. The statute talks about going through the normal process, but in fact, you know, there is language in there that these must move forward in some way, shape, or form. A couple of interesting excerpts. I'm not going to go through and read these out of, and I believe these were all pretty much in, if not verbatim, fairly similar language in each of the 3 task force reports. The fact that, you know, there was not enough time or early stages of planning, they didn't have enough detail to actually establish needs. So I think these are 2 key statements out of each of those task force reports. Both of them, or all 3 of them, excuse me, identified high-level needs and guiding principles. I've just highlighted a few of them here on the high-level needs part. Of course, support statewide regional population and economic growth, protect resources. One of the more interesting ones that generate a lot of discussion, and for any of those of you that have sat with me on a Teams or a WebEx meeting, expand rural broadband and access to broadband service. There was a lot of discussion on that and how the role, or what role DOT actually played in that. I know in the Suncoast meeting itself, there was a couple of times that the department pointed out that the expansion of that broadband did not necessarily ride on the development of these corridors. The guiding principles included evaluating alternatives and incorporating resiliency as part of the development of those corridors. Lately, we've had a little bit of activity. I think one of the most recent ones and interesting, Tax Watch, as you all know, issued a report on this in late last year, kind of questioning the need. They've gone a little bit further and done a high-level analysis in a couple of scenarios on the project cost, and they started with 3 different price points, $4 billion, $7.25, and $10.5. Again, that's to construct that 150-mile corridor. Looking at bonding 70% of the project cost, you're looking at a toll, even at the low end, of $1.31 a mile. You compare that to current rates, anywhere from 2 cents to 13 cents a mile. So that in itself, you know, raises a lot of question as to the viability of building a completely new facility from one end to the other. The next piece of this, Jefferson County in December of 2020 adopted a no-build resolution that they submitted to DOT, I believe, requesting that, you know, nothing be built in Jefferson County as part of this project. And then finally, and we've talked a little bit about this before, this year alone, DOT is looking at about an $800 billion shortfall. I think it's around $1.2 billion to $1.5 billion over the next 3 years. So that in itself, you know, may have some impact on this project. I know there's a lot of groups that are pushing for changes to the legislation, I believe including removing the language as to when it's supposed to start construction. So at that point, that's kind of where we are today. I would say my suggestion would be to take a wait and see. I think with the Jefferson County action, there's a good chance that if there is changes to the legislation, I know Madison County was pretty interested in having the corridor come through their area. So I would suggest we kind of wait and see what happens if a bill is introduced and what the context of that bill may be. Mr. Chairman, that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Slay. Board members, any questions? Commissioner Minor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greg and I talked about this yesterday too, and I'm fine with taking a wait-and-see approach, although I definitely want to make sure we keep an eye on it. You know, we talked about this last year, and there was, as you know, there was significant public comment about the need for this, and the legislature mandating the design PD&E to go forward even before the needs analysis had been conducted. We talked about this last year. I want to stress that this is not something that FDOT has decided to do. The Florida legislature has directed FDOT to do this, and it's simply following the instructions of the legislature and the law. I want to make that very clear. But I'd want to make sure that we continue to watch this because, as we talked about late last year, to commit millions of dollars in public, billions of dollars in taxpayer funding for something that has not been justified yet for needs analysis, I think is really concerning. So I appreciate Greg's points on this. I think it's something that we'll all be probably taking a strong look at for this legislative session, see what happens. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I forgot to point out that Commissioners Barfield and Dozier sit as our representative, or Commissioner Dozier is our representative. Commissioner Barfield is Jefferson County's representative. If they wanted to add anything to this as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Dozier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just reminding myself of the numbers here. So there were bills filed, and we now have bills in both the House and the Senate to repeal MCORs. Greg, do you have any updates on that, or have you?
No, actually, I looked the other day and did not see anything, so apparently I missed it.
Well, it was just referred to transportation on, this is the Senate bill, on the 10th of, so it is within the last week or so. I do remember Representative Diamond from, I think, the Tampa Bay area. He was one of the sponsors, and I'm not remembering who it is, Polsky, who is the Senate sponsor. So we do have two bills, and just if you want to look this up later, it's SB 1030 and HB 763.
I looked yesterday, and I must have not had the right search parameter or something.
It can be confusing navigating the bills, and you have to get the right search terms. You're absolutely right. So I have looked at these bills just initially, and I want to dig into it a little bit more. I'm not sure if they're going to get traction, but I think in public comments, both Representative and Senator focused on the impact to the FDOT budget, but also budget challenges due to COVID and what we're dealing with right now. So it was right in line with what we've heard from Tax Watch, 1,000 Friends, and a number of others. And I'm sure Commissioner Barfield and Chris Rito and others of us who served on the task force will let you know that there was a lot of good discussion about the needs that exist in our northern portion, from broadband to flooding on 27 and 98. I mean, we have an existing road there that's not at capacity, but we don't want to say, no, thank you, we don't need any funding, right? We want investment, we want the utilities, we want some of these other goals. But as Greg said, and FDOT staff was upfront about this, there's a lot of goals listed in the original MCORS bill or law that cannot be accomplished and are not within FDOT's scope. So it's kind of a huge promise of what this road could bring. And I mean, I'm going to speak for myself. My sense of the discussion, there were certainly those who were very in favor of the road, probably farther south where Suncoast Parkway already terminates. But there was a lot of consensus on the need for some infrastructure investment, and the collaborative work across this region, I was really impressed by. The GIS maps developed and other things. So that's just something that I keep reiterating, that we did a lot of work and it could benefit our region, but we don't need a parallel brand new road. We need to focus on our existing. So I guess I'll leave it here that I'm not sure. I'm okay with the wait and see, but we may not have another meeting or another opportunity to reflect on these bills before we get into session. So if anyone's respective commissions are interested in it, it may be something for legislative priorities. We've done that with Leon. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barfield? We can hear you through the mask, Commissioner.
Okay. It's not, I don't want to wear it. Serving on that committee was very difficult. being in Jefferson County, and we did have a 4-1 vote to have a no-build. My hope with all of that hard work that those task force went in to creating those guiding principles is that the guiding principles that came out of all those 3 task force, that it would grow legs and it would be used throughout the whole state of Florida when we are improving, when we are building new roads. My goal was to, of course, represent Jefferson County, but make sure that whatever comes out of that, good comes out of it, and it is spread across the whole state of Florida. I've made those wishes known with the Secretary and all of DOT and Secretary 3, and that is just right now my goal, that those guiding principles are adopted throughout the state of Florida. So, that's all I'm gonna say.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this item? Okay, yeah, we'll wait and see. I agree. I share your concerns, Commissioner Minor, and, I think we'll all be in touch with our legislatures as these things move through the state government. Moving on to,
If I could, real
Mr.
quick,
Blake?
just to remind everyone, as Commissioner Dozier said, the session is starting in a couple of weeks. We can always, if things happen quickly, we can do something through the executive committee if you all chose to. I know we will have a March meeting that will still be fairly early in the session, but the executive committee does have the ability to meet and react to things like this as the session goes along.
okay, thank you.
Chair? I'm sorry I don't mean to belabor this, but on that point, I appreciate the suggestion, Greg, and if this were referred to the executive committee, I'm wondering if there is consensus on the board that at the very least, I know everyone hasn't had a chance to read the bill, but at the very least, we don't want MCORs impacting our ability or any MPO's ability to fund our projects through the FDOT work plan. That's something that, we just had an update on that. We already know they're facing a deficit. And I just wanted to raise that point now, because if this goes to the exec committee, it seems like that is a position that they could take on our behalf if we were amenable to it. I don't know if we need a vote, Mr. Chair, or not, but I thought it might be appropriate just to voice it today.
Mr. Slay, what are our options there?
That's entirely up to you all. I think we have a general idea of where everybody stands on it. And again, I wouldn't expect a whole lot of movement in the first couple of weeks, because I believe our meeting's on the 16th of March as well, and I know we'll have to have a meeting. So but maybe kind of see where we're at that point and then go from there. If that works.
Commissioner Maddox?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Dozier, I think you have a good idea there, but I think just to make sure we formalize it, just in case the executive committee does have to take it up, that maybe we should go ahead and take that vote to make sure we have it on record as to the board's approval to the executive committee moving in that direction.
I would second that motion.
It's your motion.
Wait,
Well,
Commissioner Dozier, motion?
thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Maddox. If it is the will of the board, if we are in agreement of that piece, then I would make a motion to recommend to the executive committee, should it be necessary to take up a discussion of MCORs, that this board is focused on any negative impact to the FDOT budget due to the MCOR schedule, and leave it that narrow so that any other issues we can talk about at the board meeting, but focus on that.
Second.
Commissioner Maddox, is that?
Yes, ma'am, and I would
Okay.
also ask that you include in that motion that a letter be sent to the chair of the MPOAC for that organization to take up the same, have a discussion at the next meeting.
Accepted, yes, thank you. I think I know we'll get an update from you, as we always do, on MPOAC, but I would hope that you all would be able to have this discussion and take up the same. So adding a letter to the chair of MPOAC with our action. Thank you.
And I would second that friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's appropriate, considering our board position. All those in favor of the motion on the table?
Aye.
All those opposed? Carries unanimously.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add just one little caveat as we go in this direction, let's just remember wherever we are, and on behalf of the Florida League of Cities and whatever the county counterpart is, home rule is in effect.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Commissioner Dozier?
I'm just curious, pertaining to what for home rule?
In this discussion, with whatever happens, whoever's making movement, just keep in mind, because we made a formal motion to state what our opinion was, but I'm sitting here thinking the whole time, I just don't want it to come here to interrupt what we're doing here, to impact what we're doing as well. So I'm saying, on top of all of that, remember that home rule, as we know, home rule is what we as Florida League of Cities believe, that we should be determining what our future and our destiny is. And so if there is some discussion in that veers off of that path, I just want to make sure that it's understood that we want to make sure that we're not impacted any beyond what we want to be impacted, how we want to be impacted, our city.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we're all in favor of maintaining our authority locally and this board's authority and ability to disperse funds. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Moving on to 8, status report on FDOT activities.
Actually, we're on 7D.
D.
Oh,
D.
okay, yeah, D, CRTPA lobbying.
And this, again, this was a carryover from our retreat last month that got canceled. Back in November, you had asked us to look at the potential for some lobbying policies for the CRTPA. So in essence, what I did, working with council, is just did kind of a comparison at this point of both the City of Tallahassee and Leon County's lobbying ordinances, and just laid out kind of the general framework of what they have, and then kind of turn it back over to you all to kind of discuss this and get some direction from you all as to if and how you want us to proceed on developing some sort of lobbying policy.
Sure. So I'll kick off this conversation. I know at the city and the county, as well as Blueprint, we've all been having different conversations as far as registering lobbyists and looking for just some sort of continuity across all our boards. I recognize from this agenda item, my personal opinion would be, since we don't have the reach of some of the other governments, we don't necessarily need to charge a fee, but just have a process where any lobbyist could submit a registration to the CRTPA, recognizing that their intent to lobby. Any other questions or concerns on this? Commissioner Dozier?
Mr. Chair, were you asking for a motion to that effect, or this was an update looking for board direction? Is that right, Greg?
Yes, I believe.
Yes, I would absolutely support a motion that to that effect, that we develop a lobbying program for the CRTPA.
Okay.
Chair, if I may, I can ask the commissioner.
No, please, Ms. Williams, go ahead.
Just to put some additional context on the issue, when Greg and I talked, we both looked at both ordinances that were in place for the city and the county, and we had a discussion about how little or how much we had to do. And I recommended to Greg that if you decided to go forward, that you couldn't kind of go halfway based on looking at the ordinances. You would have to basically put in a complete regulatory scheme for how you would register lobbyists. And all of them have, you can arguably discuss no fee for the front side, but all of them have penalties and banning provisions in the ordinances. And there's a monitoring provision that's in the ordinances. So to the extent that it's a direction that you want to go in, Greg and I both agree that we want to keep you fully informed, and it means that you're going to have to develop a complete ordinance that discusses the regulatory concepts associated with lobbying.
Commissioner Dozier?
Thank you very much for jumping in there, because you might have addressed a couple of the questions I had. I think CRTPA is unique vis-a-vis any of our counties or cities or Blueprint. And Ms. Williams, you may be able to answer this. I know, Greg, you and I have talked about this, but I can't remember a time where a lobbyist was engaged on CRTPA projects. Now, there were some interest from builders and contractors associations, things like that. Actually, that was the overpass I-10 overpass I mentioned earlier, many years ago. But as a lobbyist coming in to advocate for something, I don't remember that circumstance, and we don't have contracts for construction necessarily. I mean, once it's approved, it's typically handled by others. Do you have any instances where this might have come up as an issue in the past years?
One of the things that we look at when you talk about lobbying is we also look at litigation on the other side in the form of a bid protest. And I can't remember how long I've represented the CRTPA. It's been probably over 10 years. And we've had one bid protest in that length of time. But on the flip side, to directly answer your question, in terms of lobbying, I can't recall of any scenario where any commissioner or CRTPA member has ever come to me asking a question about a lobbyist. And when I discussed this with Greg, he couldn't remember either. So I've been here through, I believe, 3 executive directors, and there have never been any discussions about lobbying or issues related to lobbying since I've been here.
Are you aware of any other MPOs that have addressed this issue, a lobbying ordinance or anything like that? Or is that something we could look at later?
I reached out to Carl McKiskar statewide to check on that, and to date, he has not told me that anybody that he was aware of that had.
Okay. I think it is in our interest to cover our bases on the lobbying question. We all know the history around this, but in this one instance, and particularly in light of what our attorney has said about developing a full-blown ordinance with monitoring and fees and other things, I think we have to balance it with the demand on staff time to develop that type of ordinance and whether or not it would be used in this body. And it is my understanding we can't rely on city, county, or blueprint. We can't say, go register with someone else before you come talk to us. If the board felt really strongly about this, I could get there to develop an ordinance, but I just wanted to voice that concern that I am cautious about staff time and putting in a big structure with monitoring and everything that may not be used. But I'd love to hear from others. Thank you.
Commissioner Minor, followed by Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a good discussion, and I think I agree with the general consensus that's shaping up right now. I mean, we don't want to create a big machine with a lot of staff time and effort that never gets used. I mean, the overall goal, I think, which I believe we all might want, is that if the public, if there's a lobbyist that is lobbying us in that rare blue moon, should the public have a right to know it? And the answer is yes. My question, and I don't know if council can really think about this on the fly, but is there some type of way we can recognize that and make that a public record without having to create the whole process that would allow, that might only get used once every few years? Some way to demonstrate or declare or put in a public record a lobbyist reaching out to talk with one of us about an issue that's before the board.
Let me answer that in 2 parts. Let me do not answer the question first, and then I'll answer the question. If the board so desired to not go forward with an ordinance, and you could wait to see if and when and lobbyists were to be before the board could then disclose that, but it would not be a policy of the board. And then that would give you an opportunity to revisit this issue to determine if there was something that you felt you needed to do as related to lobbying activity at that time. So you could address the issue at that time, but it wouldn't be a policy of the board. The reason you can't do it as a policy is it's pretty established in law that any governmental entity that wants to effectuate a non-public entity that comes before the body as a policy statement, it has to be an adopted procedure or decision by the body. And so you couldn't have a method by which you would want to impact that lobbyist that would be used against other potential lobbyists in the future, because that's called non-rule policy, and you can't have non-rule policy, or in this case, non-ordinance policy in place. So you could make a decision that you needed to develop a policy at the time whenever a lobbyist came before the body, and you could obviously disclose it publicly so your put it on the record that that had occurred. But at that time, if you wanted to make a decision about how to affect future lobbyists, you would have to then make a decision to institute an ordinance that would allow you to regulate that activity. So you can kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, split the baby. You can wait, and if it ever happens, when it happens, you can then say it's time to put a policy in place. And then you can disclose it, so it's in front of the public that this has occurred, but you can't have a policy at that time because it hadn't been adopted.
Mr. Chair, I think that, thank you very much. I appreciate that response. And I'd be okay with that approach. The only fly in that ointment is that by not having a policy, there's no penalty or recourse if one of us is approached by a lobbyist and then nothing is done or nothing is mentioned. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct, but it has an underlying premise that may or may not be accurate. Simply because a lobbyist comes before you doesn't absolutely mean that the lobbying or the attempt to talk to anyone is improper. It could actually be a proper contact, even by an ordinance if you had it in place. But because you have the contact, the body can then revisit whether they need to put an actual policy in place. So the fact that the contact occurred doesn't mean that it was improper. It just means that you now realize that you have activity. So it could happen either way. And as a practical matter, and as you all know, I've been practicing law for some 30 years, the presumption is that the body will act properly. The CRTPA will act properly, not improperly. It just puts the CRTPA on notice that now you actually have lobbying activity, and then the body can then revisit whether you need to put an ordinance in place or not.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Williams-Cox?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. One, do other counties like Jefferson, Gadsden, you all have lobbying ordinances or rules that your lobbyists abide by?
Thank you, Commissioner William Cox. I think that is actually what I had my sign up to address. While we're discussing this lobbying issue, please, I would like for us to understand that all the counties represented here with CRTPA are not fiscally equal. We are financially unequal. Some of us are unable to afford the professional lobbyists to come and push their agenda. Maybe Leon County and City of Tallahassee might be able to afford, but adding a lobbyist to a county like my budget is not going to be there. That's going to enable us to spread lobbyists to this level. So while this conversation is going on, I want us to be aware. I don't know about Jefferson County, and I don't know about Wakulla County, but I know that Gaston County, that is something that we have problem with. Adding to our budget, actually having a lobbyist retained that is going to be going beyond just our legislative agenda at the Capitol.
Okay, I guess I was referring to whether folks will come to you to lobby for contracts or work or what have you.
Oh.
But my thought is, we are in a period of time where things that have never happened before are happening. And we can get ahead of it and be proactive, or we can wait till it happens and then scramble. I understand the capacity and the impact, but if we want to reduce that they're having to register with a different body and having to monitor it and all of that, we could simply make it a requirement that the lobbyists are registered with City of Tallahassee, Leon County, or wherever it is that it's occurring. And if they're registered and they provide that proof of that they're registered, because again, Blueprint is different because we have the full city commission and the full county commission. Here we don't have that. We have representatives, so we have a smaller group that we're dealing with. So why couldn't we just require that they are registered with the City of Tallahassee and Leon County? That's why I was asking about the other counties, because if this is not an issue in other counties, then they they may not be that interested in supporting all of this to prepare for whenever a situation once every 10 years. But as I said, we're seeing things that are happening that have never happened before, hadn't happened since 1812. And now they're happening, and nobody was ready for it. So I believe in being proactive, but not overburdening the staff to run these people down and keep up with them. It is in the air that lobbyists must be registered. Whether they're registered with this body or with the other bodies, I think that as long as they're registered lobbyists, and if they're coming to us in that capacity, and then they need to make sure that they're registered with the City of Tallahassee and Leon County. I think that would satisfy what we're trying to accomplish.
Chair?
Mr. Chair, on point.
Mr. Attorney?
Not responding to the policy issue, because obviously that's a board issue, it's not a legal issue, but responding to the registration component of it. CRTPA is an independent body. And as an independent body, this has been a fight that's been with MPOs and local government for many, many, many years. And as you recall, when the coronavirus issue occurred and we had to draft our own policy because we are multi-jurisdictional, by the same token, you have to develop your own policy as it relates to lobbying if you want to do it. I mean, it's a great idea to be able to piggyback on the city or the county if you could. We do have the ability to use the services of the county. And interestingly enough, in the statutory scheme, when it states that, it specifically says that this does not mean that we or any CRTPA or MPO becomes a part of that municipality that it uses the staff services agreement with. So you're an independent body, and therefore, if you, as a policy decision, want to go forward, you are then going to be required to develop an ordinance.
Commissioner Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really think this is a solution in search of a problem. I've been here 6 years, and I believe I've been on the CRTPA that entire time, most of it at least. And I have never once been approached by a lobbyist for any issue that has come before the CRTPA. And I mean, we don't control a budget. We don't have, I mean, you know, the decisions that we make here don't have influence on the Department of Transportation or the legislature. And so I really think this is a solution in search of a problem. When, you know, we hear the attorney say that in all of his time here as our attorney, this has been what, one instance, Thornton, where you could have contrived it as being lobbying activity. And no other MPO has an ordinance to that effect. So I would think that we should just move on. And I'm not sure that there is a need for that at this point in time for this body. And so I would not support a motion for us to go forward with a lobbying policy when that's clearly not needed at this point for this body. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'll just add, I recognize where we may be headed, but I do think it's important to be proactive as far as waiting for lobbyists to approach us. Unfortunately, in our community, many people who are lobbying don't feel like they're lobbyists, and they don't register with the city or the county when they do have a financial arrangement to advocate for an issue. So I don't think it should be the burden of a commissioner or a board member to determine who's a lobbyist, but it should be a burden of somebody who is being paid to advocate for a position to let us know that in advance. I don't think the idea is to burden the CRTPA or any of us as commissioners, but it is to send a clear message, as Commissioner Williams-Cox saying, I don't care where you register with, but if you're getting paid, I want to know, and I want to know before you talk to me. And I think we've seen that on this board on issues not too long ago, and I also have concern about how our board interacts with other boards that we serve on. such as Blueprint, and where our road priorities line up and which projects become CRTPA priorities and which projects become Blueprint priorities, because there are financial interests at stake in some of these road projects, and they are being directed by people who have a financial interest in them. So if you're having a conversation related to that, I think it's appropriate to register and let us know. I'm happy to see that come through the city, the county, or any other county, and just put people on notice. If you have a financial interest in any decisions we're making here, it needs to be disclosed up front. Commissioner Dozier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got to voice a concern here that I think it is essential for us to have these conversations. And we all have an interest in being as transparent and above board. I think, Gordon, you said there's a assumption that things will be done correctly. I'm not sure the language you used. And yet we all know personal and examples, unfortunately, at home where things have not been done above board. So I get this tension that we want to have as much control as possible. But I do think there's kind of a slippery slope here when we start to compare what happens at other boards. And then I'm just going to pick on this. The coordination piece is a critical piece. We've talked about that for years between Blueprint, CRTPA, City, Leon, and Tallahassee. That is really critical in how those priorities are met. I've not seen a prioritization on Blueprint side necessarily impact this board unless the Blueprint board votes to advance, say, Orange Avenue or Wilani or something like that. The kind of community input we have at Blueprint is very different, or lobbying input, than what we've ever seen here. So I think whatever the vote is, and I'm not even sure if there's a motion right now. I don't think there is, Mr. Chair. But I think it would be a disservice to say we anticipate problems coming, or that the nature of CRTPA work lends itself to lobbying. It simply hasn't in the past. Now, anything could change. So what I'm going to suggest, because I'm hearing a majority kind of, at least those who've voiced opinions on this, kind of lean towards, Commissioner Minor, what you had suggested of disclosing it and then looking at a policy in the future if we need to. Could we table this for 1 year and really have more analysis on who is contacting the board, things like that, to see a snapshot? I mean, we can all sit here and say we don't have any examples of this, and we don't, but perhaps that would give some comfort just to see how it goes for the next year or so. I'm looking for a middle way here because, as I said before, and Commissioner Richardson, I think you just echoed this and framed it more succinctly than I did, but a solution looking for a problem. And this is the only board that I would say that about a lobbying ordinance in this kind of robust program. I would not say that about those other boards. So this is a unique circumstance, and I'm content to wait and see, but if we need a date certain to come back and have a conversation about it again, see what happens in the next year, I think that would be logical.
Commissioner VBCA?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Listening to this conversation, I have been on this board since 2013, and I have never personally been approached by anyone who calls themselves a lobbyist on anything. So I don't know, maybe because of where my representation on this board, maybe because the big projects that the city and the big project that Leon County undertake, that draws the attention of lobbyists to those government representation on this board. I would think that if there is a lobbyist that is interested on a project that is coming before this board, I think we have a room for them to come and make their pitch. I think that's where they call it citizen waiting to be heard, or something where the public comes and express their position in favor or in opposition of an item that is on the board agenda. I think that would be an opportunity for them to come and address the board in totality, as opposed to just an individual board member that they think is representing that particular project that is coming before the board. So with the conversation going on and what I understand of what this item is, right now, I will also not be voting in support of it for us to go on with it. If we want to table it, as Commissioner Dozier suggested, and wait to see when it becomes absolutely necessary for us to develop a policy of that nature, then we can bring it up. That policy might even come when some of us are no longer on this this board. So, and I don't know, because so that's my position on it. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Maddox?
Yeah?
No, go ahead.
Greg, how much money do we directly appropriate as a board?
Directly, probably if you look at our annual budget, $1.5 million. If you throw in the SU money that we talked about, probably $3.5 million. But again, a lot of that money is already spoken for the next 4 or 5 years, and those all tend to be small projects. We don't do typically a $3 million project with our SU fund.
Can you quantify how much we indirectly appropriate? The first question was, how much money do we appropriate? You said about $1 million or so?
Yeah.
Can you quantify how much we indirectly appropriate?
Indirectly, if I had to put a number, I would probably say zero. I mean, the work that we do with DOT in relation to the projects, that's very much a cooperative, but they have the final say. I mean, they base their programming on our priorities, but at the end of the day, I mean, we make recommendations, and that's it. This board doesn't have any, indirectly, I would say zero.
I ask those questions I ask because most lobbyists are coming to us to speak on behalf of organizations and themselves on projects that, when it comes down to it, appropriate funds or zoning or maybe even some safety, some transportation things. But when you think about how much we directly appropriate and indirectly appropriate, it looks like about a total of $1 million. I think, though the idea is honorable, and quite frankly, I could care less. We could go one way or the other, and it wouldn't affect me as much. I think maybe we should even start with, if we have a speaker come, that speaker having to disclose with their speaker form that they're a lobbyist. Maybe look at how many speakers we have come before us. And if we find out, like everyone has said, that we happen to have a lot of speakers coming to speak to us, then maybe we start having this conversation. But right now, I've been here 10 years now, well, probably more than 10, 11. I've never been approached by a lobbyist on a CRTPA issue. And I've been on the board every single year. So I just, like you said, a solution looking for a problem. Though I think it's honorable what we're trying to do, I do think it's a solution looking for a problem, and maybe we should just hold off a little bit to see what happens. But I do believe, though, that if someone stands before us, and I don't know if you already have this done, but if someone stands before us on their speaker sheet, they should have to disclose whether or not they're a lobbyist. And I don't know if we already do that, but if we don't do that, I could move in favor of us simply adding that to the sheet and moving that direction. I don't think anybody in here, if you could raise your hand, have you been approached by a lobbyist on the CRTPA issue? I don't think anybody has. So, but I do think if they speak to us, maybe they should. And I don't want to put the burden on the commissioner to say, I met with such and such, he was a lobbyist. I mean, who am I reporting it to? Do I come to my next meeting and let everybody know? Do we have a disclosure form that you send to each of our offices where we disclose? I just think that gets a little cumbersome, but the speaker sheet might not be a bad idea. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There's a suggestion maybe that helps. And again, it's a quasi-legal approach. Obviously, in the Leon County, Tallahassee community, there's a heightened sensitivity to the potential for lobbying occurring. At the same time, in the CRTPA, as we've had discussion, there hasn't been a lot of activity. What we could do to piggyback off of what Commissioner Dozier said, is to have some kind of a monitoring for a year where each meeting, when you have your briefings with the executive director, conversations occur that you advise as to whether any contact has been made. He can provide a report to the body at each meeting, so you have transparency to the public that there is no lobbying activity. Monitor that for a year, and then, as Commissioner Dozier suggested, then come back and revisit it in a year, and then you have data that lets you know whether there's any activity, and it also will address any concerns about whether there is any unregulated and unmonitored lobbying occurring. Just an idea.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney. Yeah, I think that would be appropriate, and we must all be cognizant that not just board members, but staff members as well. If people approach us and they seem to have a financial interest, it would be nice to have that come up. I don't want to belabor the point. I think we're all pretty much in agreement that either we don't get lobbied or we don't want to be lobbied without knowing, and I think that's enough moving forward. So without further discussion, we can go to 8, Florida status report on FDOT activities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only item the department would like to update the CRTPA on today is as we're moving forward and continuing our PD&E, or project development and environmental studies for the I-10 corridor, we'll soon be scheduling some public hearing dates. We will be pursuing these in a hybrid format. We will have both a physical location and a virtual link to allow the public to attend and provide comments. And just as soon as those meetings are scheduled, we'll reach out through CRTPA staff and provide the board those dates and times.
Thank you.
Chairman?
Commissioner Richardson?
Just to follow up on a couple of issues that I've inquired of FDOT, where the lanes merge on Orange Avenue, if you're headed west on Orange Avenue, and the lanes merge at FAMU High, and one becomes a right turn lane, and people are speeding to get over. We've seen several accidents there. Where accidents don't occur, there are near accidents, and I'm just curious, did you ever find out anything about what?
Yes, sir. We passed that along to our traffic operations office in Chipley, and they're looking at some options that we can utilize at that location. What they were looking to check into, do we want to put some temporary type posts up, or do we want to look at a more permanent fix at that location? And just as soon as they make that determination, we'll let you know.
Okay. Fortunately, I have not seen any accidents, but we've had several where that's been the case. And then secondly, the crosswalks at NIMS and Liberty Park, what progress we've made on addressing those?
I believe CRTPA staff is meeting with our district safety staff on that issue, and we're looking to incorporate that into a project just as soon as possible.
Yeah, we had met with their.
I would hope that it would be real soon.
We had met.
Because, like I said, at NIMS, the bus stop is on the opposite side of the street from where the neighborhood is. And so people have to cross, and they're not going down to the traffic light to cross. They're crossing where the...
Straight across. Yep.
Yeah, where the bus stop is. And then in Liberty Park, the service station is on the other side of Orange Avenue and so people are crossing to get to that service station and to the bus stop. So I really would hope that those two issues would be addressed as quickly as possible before something happens.
Commissioner, if you remember late last year, you all approved allocation for funding to both of those.
Right.
And we've been, as Bryant said, we've been working with the safety office. They're doing the preliminary study work for us now. And then hopefully sooner than later, we can roll that into some type of project for both those locations.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Moving on to the Executive Director's report.
Mr. Chairman, I just had one thing. We have our quadrennial, is that every 4 years? Certification with Federal Highway next week. We'll be doing a public meeting next Thursday, the 25th at 4 o'clock we'll send out a link to you all for that. Your attendance is not required, but we at least want to give you the opportunity to sit in and listen. Typically, we'll do a presentation, kind of highlighting some of the projects that we've done over the last 4 years, and then open it up for public comment. So probably later this week, you all will get an invite to that if you'd like to come.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Vibisi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Executive Administrator, this was a question I asked you directly, and I thought I should ask it while FDOT is here to see if I can get a clear understanding of where this project stands in regards to its being completed. The bike trail from Leon to Havana. I am not talking about the one on the Florida trail that is presently on the back burner. I'm talking about the trail that we originally had in the bike trail plan that comes from Leon County and to Havana. I need to know, I'm asking to know the status of that, because in the last conversation we had, where we showed the map of the bike trail, I did not see the one from Leon County to Havana on that map, and it has been on the map at one point that was approved. So where do we stand with that, sir?
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Vivese, as we talked about, I believe yesterday, the project is part of their bicycle pedestrian master plan, and we had planned to do that feasibility study, I think, the later half of this year for that one. And if you all recall, this was a trail that would, in essence, link up, I believe it's Meridian Road via Iron Bridge Road up into the town of Havana. But yeah, we had scheduled to do the feasibility study for that late this year, or later this year, I should say.
So it's still on the plan?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Maddox?
Mr. Chair, are you done?
Yes, sir.
All right. Are you taking commissioner comment?
We have to go through the information section.
Sounds good.
Yep. So we're at future meetings?
Well, I did want to apologize for the confusion on the timing. When we originally set the calendar last year, we had been working with the city's ethics group to schedule with their meetings. They actually, I believe, changed their meeting days, so we had wanted to go back to our normal 1:30 time. However, I had forgot that I promised the county administrator that we'd keep this meeting at 1 because the county commission has a special meeting at 3:30 today. But from this point forward, all of our regular meetings will be at 1:30.
Thank you, Mr. Slay. Is there presentations or information to be shared on the next 3 committee action?
No, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Maddox for sharing of ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to bring a report back from the MPOAC. We had a very good meeting in Orlando, just a one-day meeting. You know, we had a lot of presentations from FDOT, the U.S. Highway Administration, but the most conversation came out of the presentation we had in relation to autonomous vehicles. And in particular, the most conversation came out of the detail that we had, or the conversation that we had about autonomous vehicles. And more in particular, the adverse effect on funding autonomous vehicles is having on our transportation funding as far as maintenance for our roads and things of that nature. What the MPOAC governing board decided to do was have a series of workshops to look at just what other states are doing for alternative funding mechanisms for transportation funding. I think we all know here that as the years go by and cars become more efficient, and with the autonomous vehicles coming, electric cars coming, I mean, it's eating at everybody's transportation funding when it comes to gas tax and things of that nature. After a while, if we move, it's a double-edged sword, as we'll become more environmentally friendly, but it will also eliminate most of the gas tax funding that we have, as that's been used as a way to track how much funding we're bringing in versus how many miles vehicles are traveling. And so last time we had this conversation, of course, it brought about some negative attention here at home. I didn't want to have the conversation with that board without giving you the alert that we're going to have it. Again, this is just merely to talk about what the options are, and I'm talking about all options. I'm not just saying vehicle miles traveled or or anything of that nature. We're talking about, looking at what California is doing, what Texas is doing, what other places are doing as pilot programs to kind of get in front of this. Commissioner Dozier probably chuckle at this, but I think we could trace this conversation locally all the way back probably to Bob Ratcliffe. Commissioner Ratcliffe in his conversation about transit and how eventually the cost of transportation was going to be so high, or we weren't going to be able to keep up with it, that transit was going to be more important for us as a local government. Well, it's not just transit now. So I didn't know if that's something that you guys wanted to send me off with maybe some thoughts from this board, but I'll tell you this, it's a conversation that's very sensitive, not just here locally, but statewide. But the MPOAC governing board is taking up the courage to actually have the conversation and make a recommendation back to the state as to what kind of pilot programs that we would like to see versus letting the state dictate what they're going to give us. Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Dozier?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your distance, well-distanced from everyone, so I could hear you better without the mask. Commissioner Maddox, your leadership on MPOAC is much appreciated, and I'm smiling under my mask at the fear that was raised the last time this issue came up, and there was some reporting on it that had a lot of inaccuracies. We know that people are sensitive to data tracking and tracking their vehicles and everything like that. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I mean, that was really the crux of some of the concerns. On the other hand, this has been a long-term issue, and I'm thrilled to hear that MPOAC is going to dig into it more. I'm really hopeful the federal government will do the same. We're in deficit year after, or not deficit, we have more projects than we can fund year after year. So I would say any direction that you need from this board to reinforce our commitment to sustainable transportation funding given changes in transportation technology. Would that be generally enough for you? Am I on the right path there for an endorsement of that message?
Yes, I don't want, I think where we get into trouble is if we specifically point out different ways, but just looking at, again, sustainable transportation funding as funding models change is probably just support for that would be greatly appreciated.
I'll make a motion to support the conversation at MPOAC about long-term sustainable transportation funding in light of new technologies that have and will continue to impact our infrastructure budgets.
Second the motion.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the table and a second. Mr. Slay, did
I just want to add a piece of information. This subject's been around probably for a good 20 years. Oregon did some pilot studies back in the late 90s, early 2000s on different ways of transportation funding. But I think really in the last month or so, I think this is going to get pushed to the forefront. You heard the announcement that Ford and I believe Chevrolet are both looking at all-electric fleets by 2035. I mean, that's 14 years away. Yeah. And when your entire transportation funding system is based on gas tax, that doesn't work well with electric vehicles. I mean, I think the concept of electric vehicles is great, but we're going to have a significant problem when it comes to funding, and that's 14 years away, and these days that's next week almost.
Commissioner Williams-Cox?
I wanted to add to that it's not just the technology, but it's the City of Tallahassee has adopted a renewable energy plan that we're working towards not being reliant on fossil fuel by 2035, but definitely by 2050. So that in itself will be impacting gas tax. Now, being the owners of our own utility, that's a good thing, because when you plug into your electric cars, that's helping us. But we do need to include the fact that we are being more environmentally friendly and that we are working towards renewable energy, and not just autonomous cars, but as we work our way there, we need to include the fact that we're having impact right now because we have electric buses already. So that's taking away some of it right there. So we just, over a period of time, we just need to kind of watch the gas tax diminish.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. All those in,
One last thing, I will tell you that some of the conversation, you said the right word, you said, watch the gas tax go away. Some of the conversation was circling around the balance of, as we start to look down this model of testing different models of how we're going to do things. It may be a thing where this new way of funding starts out low, and as it gradually lifts, the gas tax goes down to where it gets to a point that you no longer have a gas tax, because you said by 2035, it's going to be obsolete anyway. So again, as the conversation happened, me and Greg will bring back, but it will be what happens during the conversation, but it will be a series of workshops that we'll have, and maybe even looking at doing a new study, because I think a study was done in the 90s as to, a 90 study was done as to different options, maybe even doing a new study at the MPOAC level to share with the governing boards across the state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
thank you, and thank you for the update. Commissioner Minor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very quick. Commissioner Maddox, thank you for bringing up the concept of, I guess, revenue neutrality, right? That's one thing I think I may hope to put the public at ease. If from the public standpoint, they're not going to be paying more at any point, but roughly trying to calculate that or project that in a way to where citizens are not paying any more than they would otherwise. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All those in favor of the motion on the table, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Carries unanimously. Any other concerns to come before the board? We are adjourned.
Yeah.
Hey.